Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Well, recently here on Crop Talk, we discussed some of the seedling diseases you want to keep an eye out for when it comes to your corn crop. If you plan to submit any samples into UNL's Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic, there are a few basic steps you'll want to follow to get the best results possible. We talked with UNL's Broderick to learn a little bit more about that process, but it began by sharing an overview of the clinic.
Yeah, so really we are here to provide diagnostic support to farmers in Nebraska and surrounding areas. And so within the diagnostic clinic, we receive samples not from all 50 states, but in my 7 years, I think we've hit about 40 different states that we've received samples for. So not just Nebraska growers, but really can be nationwide. And I primarily focus on the diseases, so fungi, bacteria, viruses, things like that. And this time of year, everybody's gunning to get into the field. If they want to see stuff coming up out of the ground just fine. But unfortunately, as stuff's coming up, maybe it's not coming up as even as one would hope. And that's really where the diagnostic clinic can come in to provide a few answers. And because one of the biggest issues with seedling diseases is they can all look the same. And it's rare that we can tell a whole lot about what the different disease is in the field. Is it Rhizoctonia? Is it Fusarium? Honestly, in the field, they look almost identical.
Kyle, you set up the why behind this pretty well as you talk about that. I think it is sometimes tempting, though, as you look out in the field, there's some uneven spots to say, it'll eventually come back. I don't need to sample this year. I guess debunk that. Tell us a little bit more of the why.
It's the reality is, most of it's probably not, it may come up a little bit, but right now is the most important time to get a good start on plant growth. If some of these plants start off behind, maybe it's just a smaller pocket, they start off a little bit stunted, they're not growing quite as well as the rest of the field, those plants are never going to catch up. And so that area is always going to be a little bit of a yield drag for you. And unfortunately, as we're moving throughout the field, we are now spreading these diseases around. Anything that moves the soil is going to move some of these diseases. And so as we're cultivating, as we're applying any pesticides, we're spreading those around. And if we have the right environmental conditions, what was once a small patch can become a pretty large segment of the field. And once, replanting is always an option, but you really don't want to replant and have the exact same thing happen again.
Well, hopefully we've convinced the viewers today to go through this process and send some samples in. So let's walk through the steps if they choose to do so. First one is to collect. What's that look like?
Yeah, so really when collecting some samples, one thing that we ask is that we get both some very diseased, but also some healthy samples as well. We also ask that you send as much material as you're happy to part with. One of the things that's always kind of a pet peeve of mine is when I'll get a sample from a 160-acre soybean field, and I will get 2 plants. And there's a lot more than 2 plants in that 160-acre field. The grower's not gonna miss those at all. And so the more samples that we receive, the better. Ideally, at least 4 to 6 disease samples. That way, we have some other plants we can go back to, pull a fresh sample if we need to, try to isolate from a different area without having to call you, ask you to go out and collect some more soil. And as we're actually collecting those plant samples, we're after about 4 to 6 disease plant samples. We're going to dig up that entire plant and including the root ball and try to collect as much of the roots as you can. We do ask that you maybe try to shake some of that dirt off, but it's really not going to be the end of the world. Then if you could please put that into a sealable plastic bag, something like a Ziploc bag works really well, with a couple of dry paper towels. We never want to add moisture to our samples, because if we're adding excess moisture, now we're basically creating an ideal environment for any fungus, any bacteria to thrive. And by the time I can look at the sample, maybe it's 2-3 days after you've collected it, maybe something else has started growing in there if you've added some damp paper towels instead of those dry paper towels.